Welcome to False Flag Weekly News, the weekly news show that looks behind the headlines, trying to figure out what might be really going on in this insane world of ours. Ramadan Mubarak, and hey, I'm Kevin Barrett with Helen Byniski, back for her monthly stint at our show. Welcome, Helen. How are you?
Good to be here.
Yeah, well, looks like you're locked down next to your brick wall, as usual.
As usual.
Yeah, New York City lockdown. We're going to hear more about that. But first, Helen, let's go through the obligatory disclaimers and the various formalities here of our show. So we question everything here. We are a media criticism show. And if you can't handle that, you might want to go somewhere else, change the channel, and basically stay somewhere safe so you're not exposed to scary ideas. So please do join if you do like the scary ideas, so we can email you and tell you where we will be broadcasting in the not so unlikely event that we may get deplatformed or replatformed or have to scramble to keep sending you the show. If you get on our email list, we can tell you how to watch it. All right, so here we are for our weekly coronavirus roundup, which is pretty much what it's all turning into these days. No, we're not selling Roundup. We're actually selling, stay away from Roundup. Don't gargle with Roundup like Trump said. Didn't Trump tell us to gargle with Roundup? Well, not yet, but maybe he will, or maybe the media will tell us he did. We'll get to that. Anyway, so the coronavirus story of the week. Let's start with yours, Helen. You got sense. Well, this was last week or whatever, but this great story that you brought on last time you were on the show went through a couple of iterations, and suddenly, you talked about the Event 201 in October, mimicking the actual pandemic that started at exactly the same time, lockstep 10 years ago, setting out exactly how this pandemic would be used to lock down America, and so on and so forth. The virus was going to bring a more authoritarian world, as it has. No, it hasn't. You can't say that. It's not true. And to prove that it's not true, to prove the world is not getting more authoritarian, we're going to engage in draconian censorship and utterly annihilate your First Amendment rights by knocking you off of medium.com. And that seems to be what happened to you, Ellen.
Yep, I mean, it's pretty Orwellian, because I wasn't even aware that my account had been taken down until somebody told me. They don't tell you your account has been taken down. You have to access it. You have to log out and then try to access your account, access your stories, and then whoops, they're gone. But if you're logged in, you might think that your stuff is still there. They just don't tell you. They don't tell you what rule you broke. I had to go into an email account that I don't even use that's linked to the account, and then it's, oh, you broke, you violated our terms of service. They didn't tell you what rule you broke, but you can download your stuff and it'll still be up there, but only you can see it. And I went to the help screen, and what do you see as the default profile, the example profile, but Melinda Gates. So that was a message. I have a screenshot of it on my website. I couldn't believe that shit. It was.
You have violated our terms of service. Melinda Gates is coming to get you.
Melinda Gates. It's really creepy, because in my article, I didn't even talk about the Event 201 very much, or about the Gates Foundation, much about that at all. I mean, I've talked about it on other shows and stuff, but that article, I assumed everybody had already heard about Event 201, so I just made a brief mention of it in the opener, and then I got into the Rockefeller Foundation and all that other stuff. So, I mean, if their idea was that I talked too much about the Gates Foundation, well, now I'm encouraged to talk about it even more, because it's their fault that I'm not on Medium anymore. So I don't know who actually owns Medium. I went and looked it up, but it's some random person that nobody's ever heard of. I have a feeling that there's some shell corporations going on there, and they've, I'm sure that, like every other social media platform, they've taken the coronavirus as an excuse to crack down harder and accuse you of, oh, if you don't go along with, I mean, I think YouTube has even said, if you don't go along with exactly what the World Health Organization says, well, are you talking about what the World Health Organization said in January, or what it's saying in April? Because those are two very different things. So, I mean, I don't know, which one are we supposed to follow?
You weren't telling people to gargle with Roundup or anything.
No,
I wasn't contravening WHO advice.
I wasn't talking about the science at all. I'm not a scientist. I'm a political scientist, maybe, but even that's a stretch. I'm a political analyst, and so I'm talking about the politics of the thing. And there was no logical reason why that article should have gotten me removed. But I'm sure somebody somewhere had issue with my wrongthink and reported me, and it only takes one report these days. If it's about the big C, then it takes one report and you're gone. So
let's talk about the big C and get ourselves reported here. Let's start out by questioning the medical state of emergency. Studies are coming in showing that it looks like coronavirus isn't much more lethal than normal seasonal flu. Now, that doesn't mean it's not an emergency. It doesn't mean that necessarily there shouldn't be emergency measures, but in New York, it looks like a fifth of New Yorkers have it. My goodness, Helen, you're in the midst of a bunch of diseased urbanites. That sounds terrifying. No wonder you're locked behind brick walls.
It's funny because I covered this for RT and I wrote about it like it was good news because it means it's much less fatal than it actually is, or than we were told that it actually is. And so I thought, okay, this is great. We can all come out of our houses now. But then I see everybody else reporting on it, like, oh my God, this is a catastrophe. We have to remain locked down for the rest of the year because everybody's got it. It's like, wait a second. This means that it's not fatal, guys. This means we can come out now, maybe take off these silly masks. But no, we can't because everybody's scared. It's ridiculous. People don't like statistics. You can use a statistic however you like, and unfortunately, they've decided to use it to imprison us. So
well,
I mean, strange. I have no idea. Maybe I had coronavirus back in January. I don't know. I was sick for a few days, but in young people, and I'm relatively young, I guess, compared to most of the people who have it. It's relatively asymptomatic. So maybe I had it already. I don't know.
Well, the previous story from NPR spun it as, if anything, bad news, right? They didn't even point out that this means that the fatality rate is much lower than was previously thought. And it looks like this Ioannidis character is right, that it's like 0.2%, just like regular seasonal flu. But they didn't even mention that in this story. And likewise, and the next story was a little better by Gina Colada, who wrote a book on the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic that was recently reviewed and covered by Dr. A.K. Dewdney, the famous pro 9/11 Truth Canadian scientist on my radio show. That was just last night. I had him on talking about Gina Colada's book, which he gave a very good review to. And so this was a little bit less biased than the NPR piece, but even so, it seems that the real lead story here should be that the death rate is 0.2%, just like the normal flu, which means maybe things aren't quite as bad as we thought. But that's buried even in this story. So it's interesting. We are being told to be alarmed, be very alarmed. And there's no such thing as good news, I guess, when it comes to coronavirus.
Nope. If everybody's infected, then it's bad. If everybody's not infected, then it's terrible. And it's you can't win. So, I mean, I think Ioannidis is one of the good experts. People should be listening to him. He's calling out statistical fraud wherever it exists. And there are some good experts out there and we should be listening to them. So I'm not familiar with Gina Colada's work, so I can't really speak to that. But it's funny how all these people who wrote books about the Spanish flu are all suddenly being paraded in front of us. I'm sure she's better than Laura Spinney, who is the biggest phony ever, who tried to blame the Spanish flu, which is actually an American flu, on China, but that's neither here nor there. She, of course, is big on Wikipedia. So.
Yeah, and that leads us to the question, whose interests are served by this panic, by making it all bad news all the time and completely burying any little shard of good news? Why would they be doing that? Well, maybe it's because the one purpose of the coronavirus pandemic or the scare stories around it is to usher in techno-tyranny. Now that sounds like a conspiracy theory, but Whitney Webb's story here is quite well documented. She's talking about a document, a FOIA document coming from this weird new, what's it called? The Artificial Intelligence Task Force that wants to make sure that the US becomes even vastly more of an Orwellian dystopia than China is, because that's the only way we can beat China in the race for fourth industrial revolution planetary supremacy. And so the coronavirus is exactly what the doctor ordered, as it were, maybe the mad doctor from Fort Detrick, because this is perfect for them. And this, I think, really does fill in the blank space in this question that is, why would the US wage a germ war on China when it was going to rebound and hit us too? Well, this answers the question. This is not only about smearing China and breaking down the world economy that's become China-centric, busting the supply chains, getting everybody to move out of China, but it's also about making the West even more Orwellian than China so we can win that fourth industrial revolution race. And so if they didn't invent coronavirus, they would have had to invent it. And I think they probably did invent it. What do you think, Ellen?
I think it's pretty clear they invented it, but yeah, and I would encourage everybody to read Whitney Webb's article, because I've had people ask me to explain what is the U.S. benefit from infecting its own citizens. Like, you guys didn't live through 9/11? You forgot about that? I mean, this is the new Pearl Harbor. I have a video called that, but yeah, no, Whitney Webb, as usual, it hits it out of the park, and I would encourage everybody to read that, because this is what's coming. We are going to out China. So all that social credit score stuff that you talk about when you talk about how evil, bad, naughty China is. Well, bad, naughty China isn't doing it to you. Now it's your government doing it to you. So maybe stop blaming China for this virus and start looking where the blame actually lies.
But it's all for the good, because this will help us develop artificial intelligence, big data, fifth generation telecommunications networks, 5G, nanotechnology, biotechnology, robotics, the Internet of Things, and quantum computing. We are going to beat China and all those things thanks to the coronavirus lockdown. Doesn't it make you feel all warm and fuzzy?
Oh yeah, more like cold and spiky. Warm and fuzzy is no good for. It's a legacy system. We got to get rid of the legacy system.
Yeah, cold and spiky is where it's at these days. You're right. Right as Whitney Webb is exposing that, the Wall Street Journal is exposing that the government is now tracking how people move around in the coronavirus pandemic.
Now?
Okay,
Only now?
yeah, they started tracking us. Oh my goodness, the cell phones have suddenly turned into tracking devices. Who would have thought?
That's new. Yeah, that's new. I mean, they're a little bit behind the curve on that one, but yeah, now they're doing it right out in the open and telling us that we like this and it's good for us and it'll help us get back to work faster, in those jobs that most of us no longer have.
That's right. The government officials are using location data from millions of cell phones in a bid to better understand the movements of Americans. Of course, it's all because of coronavirus, yes. And they wouldn't ever use that data for anything else.
No, couldn't ever backfire. Won't stick around after the virus is over. I'm sure that everything will go back to normal, just like it did after 9/11.
And of course, they wouldn't give all that data to their supercomputers that are developing AI that can develop its own next generation of AI, so there's no human intervention. But still, that's a good thing, because that puts us in control. Wait a minute, there's something wrong with this logic. In any case, so who's behind this? Who's involved with this? Well, one character is Peter Thiel, the Zionist data mining billionaire from Silicon Valley, who's part of Trump's team. He was also part of Carbine 9/11, that Israeli dystopian outfit coming out of Unit 8200 over in Israel. Close associate of Jeffrey Epstein and Ehud Barak with that. So guess what? Palantir and Peter Thiel are now right up at the front of the feeding trough for government funding to develop more of these dystopian Orwellian surveillance systems and big data crunching AI development plans. So I'm glad that this is in the good hands of somebody we can trust, like Jeffrey Epstein's pal and Israeli agent Peter Thiel.
Yep, couldn't fall into the hands of a better guy. I know I always trust my psychopathic war criminal enablers when I want to give my data to somebody that's the kind of guy that I want to have it. I mean, these scumbags are always at the front of the feeding trough, and it's kind of to be expected, but it's also like, you just hope that one time, couldn't it end up in the hands of somebody who's not criminally insane? I mean, is that so much to ask?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Thiel he's kind of the only Silicon Valley billionaire who's a huge chest-thumping Trump supporter, which is kind of interesting, given his Israeli connections. Of course, the other Silicon Valley billionaires who don't like Trump also have Israeli connections. So it's sort of hard to keep track of all these players. Well, so speaking of Silicon Valley billionaires with Israeli connections, how about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, which is now taking down coronavirus protest pages. And they said it was at the request of the states, but it turns out that the state is Facebook itself, because It was Facebook that had the idea, contacted the governors who never told them to take down the pages, and Facebook took down the pages anyway and then lied about it. Is that the kind of behavior that we should expect from an outfit run by a kind and gentle Trump-hating individual like Zuckerberg?
Yeah, I definitely predicted this in the chapter I wrote for Cynthia McKinney's book that's coming out soon. So my prediction has already come to pass. But oh well, it was a prediction when I wrote it. Anyway, yeah, the tech companies realize they have more power than the governments, and they can do whatever they want because what are the governments going to do? Say no, and then what happens? Like the tech companies have all the data on the government, so if you say no, then whoops, there goes all of your data. Whoops, suddenly leaks into the hands of your enemies, and we wouldn't want that to happen now, would we? Yeah, I think this was pretty funny because you watch CNN running interference for them and coming out with new versions of the tweet every time. And oh yes, they did it because of the request of the governments. And oh, they did it after consulting with the governments. And whoops, no, they just cut the governments right out and just spike those protests because we don't want people not social distancing. They might like meet in person and not use Facebook anymore. That wouldn't be cool.
But you would think that the Bill of Rights gives us the right to peacefully assemble and redress of grievances, and so if we're not allowed,
doesn't apply when there's a virus.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, do we know that these people were planning to get like 5'11" from each other instead of the safe 6 feet?
Facebook probably does know that, yes.
Yeah, they know everything. Facebook knew that, yeah, they shut down California, New Jersey, and Nebraska protest pages. And maybe they knew that those were people who actually were going to get a little closer than that 6 foot safe distance. By the way, Helen, A.K. Dudney on my show last night said the whole notion of a 6 foot safe distance is completely ridiculous. He talked about, yeah, like when the sneezes and coughs and so on put these tiny little droplets into the air, not the droplets that are big enough to have any gravity to come down and land on the ground, which is what we're told happens. But no, there are ones that are so tiny that they just float and float and float, and the virus lives for about 2 hours and then dies. And actually, it's probably a good thing to be breathing in the dead virus, because that's what's going to give you immunity. You can actually get the equivalent of a vaccination, probably perhaps in a safer way without all those adjuvants, by breathing these dead viral particles, which are floating around in the air. But there are live ones floating around in the air too, and they're going to go a lot further than 6 feet. So the whole notion of 6 feet as a safe distance is completely insane, and yet the entire world has been brainwashed into believing it.
Yeah, that and the mask requirement thing when you don't have eye protection, that makes no sense at all because half the people are wearing these surgical masks, which don't actually protect against the virus. So the old people cough, the stuff is going to go out all kinds of sides of the mask, and it's going to get in other people's eyes. And then, so this whole idea that you're protecting yourself, I wrote a whole article about how it's basically become a religious talisman that people wear for protection. And they don't actually, it's more of a like personal security thing than it is an actual protective item. I'm not saying that people shouldn't wear masks. I would actually appreciate it if people do wear masks, if they're going to be coughing on me, but like you want to wear some eye protection.
Yeah, it's just like virus. Yeah, it's just
actually scared of the
virus. Right. It's like a voodoo amulet. And if they told people that sucking on a pacifier protected you from coronavirus, you'd see crowds of people 6 feet apart sucking on pacifiers. I mean, that's pretty much the way it's gotten these days. Well, how about the coronavirus war on China? I do think this is the bottom line here. I think the dystopianism in the United States, as the article by Whitney Webb suggested, isn't so much dystopianism for its own sake, although there's certainly probably some people who would push that anyway. But no, I think it's about the new war on China. China is the biggest challenge the United States has ever faced in its entire history, as Steve Bannon says, and it really is.
It's always the biggest challenge. Everything has to be the biggest challenge. It can't be a smaller challenge. That would be ridiculous. And then we have to the military budget, and we can't do that.
Well, this is the first time that it looks, the U.S. was on a constant upward trajectory throughout its entire history until it became the sole superpower after the end of the Cold War. It really was before that, actually. Totally dominated the 20th century. And now China is already ahead of us economically and in many respects technologically. And so the days of unipolar U.S. planetary domination are numbered. So in a sense, this is the big change or turning point. It's never been a downward trajectory before. We've never had somebody else rising to displace us. And that is what's happening with China. And that's precisely why the U.S. attacked China with the coronavirus and attacked itself to turn itself into a kind of a country that could beat China, or at least has a ghost of a chance in the eyes of its psychopathic neocon leaders. And this article by Pepe Escobar makes a very good point. We've now had multiple sources, ABC News, Israel, and so on, confirming that the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency was warning of a cataclysmic pandemic stemming out of Wuhan, China in November 2019. The Chinese had no idea anything like that was happening in Wuhan until the end of December. Therefore, the U.S. knew better what was happening there than China did. How could that be? Well, because they planted it there, obviously. Is there another answer to that? Is there another possibility? I mean, tell me, Helen, how else did they know?
This is the most logical possibility to me, and there is plenty of evidence to back it up. I mean, I hear people who should know better are still trying to blame China for this, and I'm sorry that there's so much evidence to point to the U.S. here. It's overwhelming. I mean, this article of Pepe Escobar's and then the Ron On's article, I thought made some very good points, which kind of the outgrowths of points that I was making back in February, and that article that's now is cause for censorship. It's the Wuhan military games. You have 300 people show up from your enemy country in your country for a good friendly competition, and then whoops, suddenly everybody's getting sick. But they're getting sick with something that could be easily mistaken for something else. So of course China took a month to figure out what it was, because this is a previously unknown pathogen. Meanwhile, the US is compiling intelligence reports and sending them to Israel and NATO. So yeah, who knew what the virus was? It wasn't China, let's put it that way.
That's right. Well, Pepe Escobar was on top of this early on. And I'm impressed by this because Pepe, he knows about 9/11 truth, but he never talks about it. He's trying to preserve his reputation as a relatively conventional establishment kind of guy who can write for the Asia Times and be read by relatively conservative, conventional minded people. But he's pretty much taken the red pill on this. But I mean, how could you not? And so I basically said the same thing on Press TV. And that story has done pretty well over at Veterans Today and elsewhere. But I didn't say anything really that Pepe hasn't said. And in the next, let's move to the next slide and look at Ron Unz. He went through a fairly extensive explanation of why he thinks that this was a U.S. attack on China that unintentionally and in an unforeseen way blew back against the perpetrators and is now doing more damage to the US than it's doing to China. So this will go down in history as a terrific fiasco by the Americans who attacked China and had it blow up in their face. That's Ron's interpretation. And I've argued this with him and said, Ron, I think they knew it was going to go global. I think they wanted it to go global. And I think all this damage here in the US is precisely what they wanted so they can institute their Orwellian dystopia like Whitney Webb suggests. So here's a case where I actually disagree with Ron about something, but I still have to admit that his article is very well argued. And as far as pointing the finger at the US as the likely perpetrator and explaining why we can believe what the Chinese say a little bit more than we can believe what the Americans say, I thought this was a really good piece.
Yeah, me too. How the Chinese, they don't have the propaganda apparatus that we do, so they have to hew closer to the truth. I mean, it's the same thing I always say about RT, is that if we get anything wrong, we're accused of pushing disinfo. And so we have to be accurate, because otherwise we're toast. And US media doesn't have to be accurate. US media is rarely accurate because they run the whole show. So it's and yeah, this was an argument that I had not heard before about how, well, SARS only stayed in Asia and locality, so they didn't necessarily think it would blow back. But again, it had already escaped Fort Detrick, so it, like the area around Fort Detrick had multiple breaches had happened before they shut it down back in August. So the disease was already present in the US when it was dropped in Wuhan, which is why you had California. There was already all of these pre-existing cases of where people had already become immune to the virus. So I mean, as much as it is well argued, and he does make several good points, otherwise I don't think that they necessarily expected it wouldn't come to the US. They only started talking about it after it went to China because it fits the narrative. Then you can blame China for all of the harm it causes in the US, but it was already in the US when it went to China.
Mm-hmm. Well, one good point Ron makes in this article is that when it hits Iran in a way it never hits anywhere else, where 10% of the entire Iranian parliament gets coronavirus and more than a dozen of its top officials and politicians die, nothing remotely like this happens anywhere else, although I guess we did get one PM in Britain catching it. But Iran gets just clobbered at its highest levels, and the virus, of course, started right in the heart of the Islamic establishment in Qom. And he says, basically, how could anybody in their right mind think that that's a coincidence?
Yeah, between it hitting two of the US's number one enemies, China and Iran,
And this is 2 weeks after they killed Soleimani. Right.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, you have to be a major coincidence theorist to believe that, oh, yes, this originated naturally and just happened to, the virus, it has a mind of its own. It just doesn't like the same people the US doesn't like. I mean, it's too absurd to think about. So yeah, this is not a
and another cool thing about this, like so many of these UNS articles, these American Pravda articles, he calls them, is that he goes back and looks at these historical episodes that have been miscast by the Western mainstream establishment. In this case, the 1999 bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, which of course we were all told was just a terrible, they didn't mean to bomb the Chinese embassy, oh, just a mistake. It turns out that it was not a mistake, that the CIA called in that one bombing, unlike the hundreds of other bombings there, in order to try to either get revenge for or maybe to destroy the Chinese capture of a US F-117A stealth fighter that had been shot down thanks to some Chinese help to the Serbs. So the Serbs gratefully gave the plane to the Chinese. They put it in their embassy. And then lo and behold, suddenly, boom, the Chinese embassy is blown to smithereens. A bunch of Chinese ambassadors are dead. And the US is saying, oh, it was just a terrible mistake. But in the US, everybody still thinks it was a terrible mistake because nobody's ever heard about the F-117. And likewise, Tiananmen Square, there was no massacre in Tiananmen Square. There were people killed elsewhere that night, but we're still told every year, oh, there was a terrible massacre in Tiananmen Square. So here's two historical episodes that the average Western person has no clue about what really happened. And he's using this as an example of how we might believe the Chinese rather than the Americans when there's a clash of views. And I think that's well taken. I hadn't even known this. I hadn't known some of the details about the F-117 and the Belgrade bombing. So I was glad that Ron pointed to those sources. That's, there's so much revisionism in so little time.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that either. I thought that was very interesting. I knew about the Tiananmen Square thing, basically that famous photo of the guy standing in front of the tank. The tanks were leaving. The tank never ran over the guy. He was just standing, and people were probably standing around wondering, what are you doing? The tanks are leaving. Why are you standing there? But it's very interesting because everybody knows that photo, and we're told that, oh, the Chinese, they censored this photo wherever it is, and they hate it so much. And it's like the thing didn't even happen. So it's pretty ridiculous that the things that people believe, depending on what country they grew up in, and how somebody halfway around the world probably believes something completely different.
And then one more item from Ron's article to highlight is the arrest of Professor Charles Lieber. Happens right as the coronavirus thing takes off. Obviously, there's a relationship there. And the American media says, oh, no, it has nothing to do with coronavirus. Well, Ron says, maybe Lieber, who's an expert exactly in this area, knows that this is a biological weapon and said something like that. And that's why they grabbed him.
Lieber's house is partially owned by Harvard University and was heavily financed by Epstein, though. And I'm surprised that UNS didn't get more into that because another researcher that I've talked with, Mariam Haneem, has looked into this, and he's like deep into these nanotechnology things and this ability to like insert a foreign body into a human cell and have it not be rejected by the cell. And so I would say look into her research, because I thought that she was maybe a little off about that at first, but the more I see about it, the more I think that she's onto something. So
okay, something to look into. That's a good tip. Okay, so of course we have to blame all this on China. Officially, there's a huge propaganda war on China because this is the Chinese virus after all, right? And part of this propaganda war is being carried out in the pages of where else? The New York Times, all the news that's fit to print and then some. Here's an article about the terrible nationalism and xenophobia that's broken out in China. Well, I wonder why that would be. We just hit them with a biological weapon and they're mad at foreigners. Why would they feel that way? I don't know. What do you think, Ellen?
Yep. I mean, the New York Times has not stopped hammering China since day one of this pandemic. I've done 2 media analysis pieces for RT about like the hypocritical coverage of China versus, say, Italy or the US or any other country that does, the same things that China's doing because we're trying to contain what we're told is a killer plague. It's the New York Times really, you would think that for somebody, for an organization that hates Trump so much, that they wouldn't suddenly develop this outpouring of US jingoism, but I guess, they can be on the side of Trump when it's bashing China. And yeah, this of course, they wait to the very end to talk about if this is the one that they're talking about how, oh, they're being so mean to Black people and stuff. They wait till the very end to talk about how, oh, Japan has an initiative for all businesses to move out of China, and the U.S. is supporting this initiative, and they wait till the very end to talk about that. So
and doing its own initiative too. Yeah. This whole coronavirus pandemic, this act of germ warfare, is designed to do exactly this, to get everybody to break ties with China, move out of China, stop the Chinese double-digit economic growth that's going to cause China to supplant the U.S. as the world's top superpower within a decade or two at the most, unless something history-changing breaks out. And something history-changing just did break out. What a coincidence. And not only that, not only are we busting everybody's ties with China, including our own, and breaking those global supply chains to kill China's economy, but we're also going to force China to pay reparations for the coronavirus. There are lawsuits all over America. The one in Texas is asking for, what is it, 20 trillion or something like that, more than the US GDP. And this, you can't make this stuff up. And the Chinese don't like it, and they're getting mad. I can't imagine why that would be.
Yeah, why would they be getting mad? Yeah, Missouri filed one too. I think they were the first state to do it, but I maybe the Texas one came first. I don't know. I wrote about the Missouri one. I think that was the first, but he didn't even ask for a number. He just said, we want it all. We want it now. And it's like, who are these people that even think they have standing to do this? Is Japan going to sue us for dropping atomic bombs during World War II? I mean,
well, they should.
They should, yeah. A lot of places. If we're going to start with this, this is a Pandora's box which will never be closed. If any money is ever awarded from China to the U.S. for this, we are going to be very, very sorry. Let's put it that way. Because is Iraq going to sue us for leveling their country twice? Is Iran going to sue us for killing their military commander? I mean, it's ridiculous. This is not a precedent we want to set.
But there's a great excuse to confiscate those trillions of dollars worth of T-bills that China owns. China has owned more and more of the U.S. because it's running that huge balance of payment surplus with everybody. And so here's the chance to stiff them. And that's probably part of the reason for attacking them and everybody else with coronavirus. I mean, it's so obvious. It's kind of pathetic that there are still people in the world who can't figure this out, like 99.9% of them, apparently. A bunch of sheep, I guess.
Well, I mean, we're told they're a bunch of sheep, and I think that they want other people to think that they're all a bunch of sheep. But I think that people secretly have suspicions. They just don't. They don't feel comfortable voicing them because they don't want to be called a conspiracy theorist. We've decided as a society that being called a conspiracy theorist is a fate worse than death. But it's like, I mean, so what? You're going to be a coincidence theorist instead? I mean, if that's the dichotomy, so, well, I don't know. I mean, I'd rather be one than the other.
Well, yeah, so we're in the middle of World War III here against China and where else? Iran. Iran is actually hitting way above its weight in terms of the push for a multipolar world and for an end to Zio-American planetary supremacy. And they're making some pretty big steps here, even as they've been blasted by coronavirus right in their Qom headquarters and right in their parliament and among their top leaders. Iran is putting more and more sophisticated satellites into space, including a recent one, which apparently pissed off Trump, among others, and the Israeli handlers who run the Trump administration. And so now there's a big to-do about who's going to destroy whose boats. Trump is going, he says, I've instructed the United States Navy to shoot down and destroy any and all Iranian gunboats if they harass our ships at sea. Wait a minute, you shoot down a gun, you shoot down an airplane, don't you sink a gunboat? But what do you expect from Trump? In any case, the Iranians are saying the same thing. In the next slide, we see that they're going to destroy the U.S. ships. So if the U.S. sinks a couple of these little Iranian gunboats, which are very, very well armed with missiles and so on that can take out much larger ships, the U.S. loses some big boats, I think we'll come out behind. But that would, of course, solve the price of oil problem, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and that would also solve the problem of the war that he's going to need to get reelected. So, I mean, it's unfortunate because as much as I would love to see some of our aircraft carriers, maybe leave the Persian Gulf in one way, in one direction or another, either by going on the water or going under the water, because they really have no business being there. I have to side with Iran on this one. I hate to sound unpatriotic, but we have no business being in the Persian Gulf. We need to GTFO. And this whole, it's ridiculous. I mean, the fact that in the middle of this pandemic that's supposedly so all-encompassing, that we can afford to be doing this stupid thing is it's idiotic.
Well, if we had fleets of Iranian warships steaming around in the Great Lakes and, anchoring
Yeah,
right off Chicago and Toledo, Milwaukee, Detroit, and so on and so forth, a lot of people would say you do a lot more than just harass them with speedboats. But of
exactly.
course, we don't, the other way around, it's totally different. Well, no, we have the right to do it to them. They just can't do it to us.
Yeah, it's international waters. That means it's ours. No, that's not what international waters means, dude. It means everybody can use it, and your warships don't belong there.
Indeed. But of course, that price of oil problem, which we'll get to later, is could be related to this because maybe they're thinking the only way we can save the oil markets would be to have a big war there and shut down the Gulf. And who would be thinking that way? Well, a lot of people, including our good friends over in Israel. So let's move on to the Israel news. Israel it always seems to have more than its share of fingers in all of the most rotten and nasty pies. And here's one from the No Camels site, which is an Israeli technology site. I guess they No Camels is an ethnic slur meaning no Arabs, and the Israelis are just so upfront with this sort of thing. Remember the Camel Club at Fort Detrick, where the Camel Club guy Philip Zach, a Zionist scientist there, was harassing his Arab co-workers, and
trying to get them framed for anthrax.
Yeah, framing them for anthrax before anybody else knew the anthrax was sent. And so here's another anti-Arab, bigoted camel website telling us about how what a miracle! The Israeli scientist has now gotten a U.S. patent for the coronavirus vaccine. The Israelis are always ahead of the curve on these things too, aren't they, Ellen?
Yeah, well, they had a vaccine in development before the pandemic even broke out. I mean, what are the odds of that? That they must just be really lucky. I guess they woke up on the right side of the bed that day. But no, this is ridiculous, and it's like I really shudder to think is what is going to be in these vaccines, because if you know anything about what happened when they tried to develop a vaccine for SARS, it wasn't pretty for the lab animals, and they're just going straight to human testing on these. So we're going to see some people like bleeding out of their orifices and you're just dying horribly because that's what happened to the lab mice. So it's not good. When challenged with the virus after getting vaccinated, people die horribly. So watch for that.
Well, Israel has a long history of doing hideous experiments on people, and they've got a captive population of Palestinian prisoners to play with. They're most famous, of course, for irradiating young Sephardic Jewish children among the immigrants to Israel during the early stages of the formation of the state of Israel. They did these horrific radiation experiments, sharing their findings with the U.S. about radiation exposure, and they killed and maimed thousands and thousands of these Sephardic Jewish children. So they'll experiment on anybody, as bigoted as they may be. But of course, Israel is, of course, a liberal democracy, right? So they have protests, and they have really well-behaved protesters who obey social distancing and stay exactly 6 feet apart, not 5 feet 11, not even 6 foot 1 inch. They're all exactly 6 feet apart. Measure them. Here they are demonstrating against Netanyahu. Well, I'm glad there are Israelis who don't like Netanyahu, but still, the Palestinians are not being allowed to protest in Jerusalem. But the very decorous anti-Netanyahu protesters are allowed to protest in Tel Aviv, another typical Israeli double standard.
Yeah, this was the most color revolution-y thing that I've ever seen. This is so staged and so absurd. I'm also glad that there are Israelis that don't like Netanyahu, but as you said, nobody else gets to protest. It's these guys, and they're being addressed by Yair Lapid, who is also part of the Israeli ruling class. So it's it's kind of like the Democrats and the Republicans. They're all on the right in Israel. The leftists don't really. There isn't really a leftist movement. So I mean, there is, but it's very small and it doesn't have any power. So this is they're just passing the hand from one head of the Hydra to the other head of the Hydra.
Indeed. And Israel is, of course, the prime force pushing for a U.S. war on Iran. But now the circumstances for that may be more favorable, as Trump desperately needs a rally around the flag effect in time for his reelection. And as oil prices have crashed so low, as we mentioned earlier, that shutting down the Gulf might save them. And those prices are really, really low. This headline says $10 per barrel, but actually U.S. West Texas Intermediate went down to a negative $37.63 a barrel last Monday. So that means that they will pay you $37.63 so they can give you a barrel of their oil. So I guess I should order up a few million of those. I'm not sure what I would do with them.
Yeah, where would you put them? That's the whole problem, is that they're running out of places to store the oil because everybody's under quarantine and nobody is using any fuel. So like the reason why it went to a negative price was because you had to take delivery for it like now, and nobody has any place to put it because nobody's using it. So well, people would still want oil in a few months. If you take delivery of it now, well, where do you put it? So that's why the price is so weird. But yeah, they could definitely use war, I guess, if you feel like human lives are worth less than oil markets. Yeah, let's have one of them there wars then.
Well, nobody would ever think like that. I certainly hope. But a war in the Persian Gulf would burn up lots and lots of oil too, right? I mean, they'd have to send all the troops there and steam all the ships there and the planes and all of that. So not only would they shut down the Gulf, shut down all of that supply, but then they would also create a demand. So I don't trust them not to be thinking that way. That's for sure. So and another sign of the times here is the likelihood of a famine of biblical proportions coming out of the coronavirus pandemic. According to The Guardian, 265 million people could just plain starve, according to their estimates, which is more than double the number of people who are already starving, which is already pretty horrible. But busting all these global supply chains may be great for waging economic war on China, but it's not so great for the poor people who depend on the global food markets. So this could end up killing way more people than the coronavirus itself does.
Yeah, and this I found interesting because, like, all of his time, Bill Gates, of course, this is his depopulation of Africa that he wants, has been saying, oh, yeah, coronavirus is going to hit the developing world. It's going to hit the developing world, like, really bad, so we need a vaccine now. And, of course, it hasn't really hit the developing world because, for whatever reason, I mean, maybe just because they don't live long enough to die from coronavirus. Most of the people dying from coronavirus are over 70, and a lot of the people in Africa just don't live that long. So, the starvation is what they're much more likely to die of as a side effect of the coronavirus. And it's just really like disgusting how all of this just fits into place with the various goals that they have about, let's depopulate all of Africa. Let's get rid of a lot of Latin America too. And, all those people down there, we don't need them. We could use this for, we need them to mine our cell phone minerals, but that's about it. And yeah, this is really bad. The whole locust thing too. I mean, this was already a problem. That article talks about the locusts, and dude, can't fight locusts. Hello. Uh-oh.
Yeah, it is. China, the coronavirus hit immediately after the swine flu, the bird flu, and the drones were flying over the Chinese pig farms and chicken farms, spraying them apparently with something. And the official story is those were just criminals who were speculating on the markets, but Chinese suspect the CIA might have had a hand in it. And likewise, the plagues of locusts hitting these places in Africa, where just as the coronavirus is cutting the global food supply chains. So, maybe Bill, I was thinking Bill Gates was going to be miserable about COVID-19 actually not causing depopulation, but quite the contrary, because everybody's locked down with nothing else to do but make babies. And it takes 6 months to get your condoms from Amazon. It's worse than toilet paper. So he's tearing his hair out saying, oh, what have I done? That was my parody article. But, maybe he is actually planning to depopulate the world through this. I don't know. But we're certainly not going to say anything that terrible about Bill Gates as an assertion. Just raise it as a question, because we don't want Melinda Gates to suddenly have her image pop up in place of False Flag Weekly News telling us that we don't exist anymore.
God, that was so creepy, man. You have no idea how creepy that was.
Yeah. Oh, Helen, you suddenly your picture has morphed into Melinda Gates. No, just kidding.
No, it was no.
All right. So could anything possibly good come out of this coronavirus crisis? Well, some people say yes. That would be the universal basic income. The House Democrats plan to start the ball rolling with $2,000 payments per American every month. This is Andrew Yang's proposal on steroids. He only wanted to give us $1,000 a month. And there's a big generational difference in views. The old rich people say, this is terrible. The lazy poor people will just take this money and they won't work anymore and they won't slave for us. Whereas the poor and younger people say, hey, this is great. That way we could, relax a little bit and work on our business plans and our plans to start rock bands and our this and our that. So there's a big generational difference here. The Democrats are getting behind this, it looks like. The next slide, let's just go through these next two. It's all on the same universal basic income theme. An op-ed in Eurasia Review supports the idea, and then a great piece by Ellen Brown, who often shows up on my radio shows, makes all of the nuts and bolts arguments why it would work. Oh yeah, let's stop with Ellen's article. And Ellen, what do you think about this concept?
I mean, while I see her points here are good ones as far as the gap between the average amount that people make and the cost of living, and just the insanity of the debt-based system and how it just simply does not work. Those are some good points. However, I also see this as being a very insidious way for the government to get its hooks in people. And I mean, obviously, if you misbehave, what if your payments are cut off? You're not going to be able to afford anything anymore because you will not be employed, because you will have assumed that, okay, you can just keep collecting your government check and doing whatever you do that maybe is fulfilling to you, but does not have an actual economic reward from that could keep you afloat in the event your payments get cut off. I mean, I think most people who have had interactions with government benefits realize that sometimes they're cut off on a technicality, and sometimes they're cut off because you violated some unseen rule that you did not know existed, or sometimes there's just computer error and then whoops. But yeah, the idea of trusting the government to keep you afloat in times of need, it's something that we should be able to expect from our rulers, but given what the American government is capable of, I don't think that this is necessarily a good idea. I see a trap, and it's a pretty big one. But right now, yes, these payments are necessary because half the country is out of work or something like that. I don't know what the actual statistics are, but I know that 26 million people or something have filed for unemployment, which means there's probably another 26 million who are already unemployed. Like, this is something we need right now. I don't know if it's something that should be permanent, but yeah, we need more than that $1,200 check, which supposedly some people have gotten. I don't know, I haven't seen any money yet, and I definitely qualify for that thing. But yeah, it's useful for now. I don't know if it should be a permanent thing though. That's a step that I don't think we should be taking right now.
Yeah, Ellen doesn't really get into the civil liberties implications of it, but yeah, I can see why you might not want to be totally dependent on it if it could be yanked. It's, could become the mark of the beast. Everybody could only buy and sell if they had the mark of the beast. And, so they inject you with a microchip that you have to sort of swipe somewhere to get your digital 2,000 a month. I don't know if I would like that either. But Ellen's argument here is economics. She's arguing against the gold bugs and the other hard currency, libertarian types. She says that, in fact, the financialized economy has become a parasite on the real economy. Yes. The financialized big casino for the billionaires now contains most of the money in the system. So you need a way to get money into the hands of the real economy on Main Street. She thinks just, this helicopter money is the best way to do it from an economics perspective. And then the next article adds, which is from CNBC. And so we're getting this mainstream speculation about UBI. Used to be just this weird thing that this crazy Andrew Yang was proposing. And now we hear that Zuckerberg's behind this. Elon Musk is behind it. Other Silicon Valley billionaires are all behind it because they think that this will be a way to help people whose jobs will be replaced by computerized equivalents like self-driving cars to get some kind of income, as artificial intelligence takes away all useful productive activity out of the hands of humans. So we'll basically all be living the high life on UBI with all of our needs taken care of by robot slaves who have totally independent artificial intelligence that's evolving all the time. But they'll just keep being our slaves, won't they?
No, you really think Mark Zuckerberg wants to help people? You really think Elon Musk cares? I mean, he's better, as billionaires go, he's better than Zuckerberg, but I don't think Mark Zuckerberg wants to help people. I think he wants to control people, and that's a great way to do it. You get universal basic income delivered through your digital payment system. That, I mean, even this Democrat bill is talking about, oh yeah, you could pay them through Venmo, you could pay them through PayPal, you could pay them through, and yeah, maybe a check. But eventually they're going to come up with some stupid reason why they can't send checks anymore because, oh yeah, it's paper, you have to cut down a tree for it. Why don't you just print it on recycled paper? Well, we don't want to do that. So it's going to be a digital only thing. And then they've already got a central bank digital currency lined up in the Fed, and they've been working on this for years. Trust me, it's in the chapter of a book that's coming out in a few months.
So the UBI may or may not be the good news coming out of the coronavirus crisis, but here's some real good news. No nobody could argue with this. Donald Trump, our great president, saved billions of people. He likely saved billions of lives by doing whatever the heck he did to stop the coronavirus. I must have missed it, whatever that was. So, Helen, aren't you grateful? Billions of lives, that's really something.
I can only imagine like how many more billions of lives would have been saved if he didn't do all of that nothing that he did. I mean, he's got an interesting way with numbers, that's for sure. I mean, I really don't know what exactly he was trying to say by this. Maybe he's implying that somehow because he's trying to destabilize China's government that it will save billions of their lives. I don't know what this was all about.
Okay, well, more crazy stuff that Trump said, and this one was jumped on by the mainstream media in possibly a slightly deceptive manner. They say that he suggested injecting disinfectant to beat coronavirus and clean the lungs. Well, what did he actually say? He said something about the light, light kills the virus. So if we could just zap our insides with light, blah, 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 and this rambling thing. And then he says, so the disinfectant that knocks it out in 1 minute, in 1 minute. And there's a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning. So what he said was actually not even as coherent as this claim that he wants you to inject Lysol into your lungs. But the media, of course, is saying, no, don't try this at home. Don't follow the president's advice and inject Lysol into your lungs. Sometimes I wonder, who's crazier, Trump or the media?
It's really insane how the media has completely taken what he said, which while rambling and incoherent, at least if you look at the words, he's talking about this UV light therapy that apparently they've got it hooked up so they actually inject these tiny little UV things into people's veins, lungs. Like they can put it down. They're doing a test right now where they put it down the ventilator and actually putting it into people's lungs. That is what he was talking about, because you notice after he's talking about the disinfectant meaning the disinfectant effect of the lights. I mean, I feel like I'm translating from a different language here, but apparently I'm the only one who heard this. Well, me and a bunch of Trump supporters heard this. It's weird how you hear things based on your political views, but I'm not a Trump supporter, so I don't really understand why all the media ran with this. I guess because, you get more clicks when you say, hey, Trump said everybody inject yourself with Lysol. But that's not what he said. He's talking about this light thing. And while, yeah, I mean, most people haven't heard of this light therapy. I hadn't heard of it until I went on Twitter and read the comments on some of these tweets. And then I see these images of this weird little light thing going into somebody's arm. It's like, it looks like science fiction. So I can understand how maybe Deborah Birx hasn't heard of it or something, but it's interesting. I don't know if it works, but he's talking about the disinfectant of the light. It kills it in a minute, apparently. And why don't we do that? So, I mean, it's anybody's guess. That was what he actually meant, but I think that's what he actually meant. I wrote that that's what he actually meant. And he definitely didn't say shoot up Lysol. So fake news.
Yeah, well, of course, what he said was a lot more incoherent than shoot up Lysol. Yes. But the Lysol makers have reassured us that under no circumstances should our disinfectant products be administered into the human body through ingestion, or any other route. So there goes my plan to grab a needle and try to find a way to inject some Lysol into my lungs to protect myself against coronavirus. I'm glad you told us that, Lysol Incorporated. So
it's really ridiculous, because if they think that Trump supporters are as gullible as they say they are, then they're actually hurting them by translating Trump's incoherence into inject Lysol, because then they're saying that Trump said that. And so people theoretically, according to their own view of Trump supporters as being like subhuman something, then they would be encouraging those people to shoot up Lysol by saying this. So I don't know. I mean, do they want to kill Trump supporters? Yeah, maybe, and maybe they do. But I don't think Trump supporters are that gullible. They are gullible, yes, but not quite that gullible.
No. If we see a news story about some Trump supporter who injected Lysol into his lungs and died as a result of the president's bad medical advice, we can be pretty sure that that's a false flag, and that person was MK Ultra.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. They're not that dumb. Trump supporters may be gullible and stupid. No, I'm just kidding. That a few of them are actually gullible and intelligent, but they're not that gullible.
Yeah, there's some differences there, and I mean, even that fish tank cleaner incident, I read something about that made it seem like something a little more than just a misunderstanding of a labeling on a fish tank cleaner. So I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody or accuse them of any crimes, but that's something that needs looking into.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical about that one too. So let's move on to more possibly good news. I mean, the good news is he didn't tell you to shoot up Lysol, and the good news is he saved billions of lives. And more good news. Oh wait, this isn't the good news. This is the bad news for Trump. Trump is losing vast piles of money on this coronavirus. I bet he's tearing his hair out, saying, "Man, I never should have listened to the CIA when they told me to attack China with a bioweapon. That was the stupidest decision I ever made." Because he's losing $1 million a day in lost revenue. And now he's begging the government for a handout to keep the Trump International Hotel afloat. So I guess that would be, the Chinese karma. What do you think?
I don't think that they even asked Trump about releasing the bioweapon in China. I think that was done without consulting him at all. They probably told him later and said, "Hey, by the way, we did this." So, but it's cool, right? Because China bad.
Well, I think they probably said, "Okay, Don, we've done we did MERS and we did SARS and we did chicken flu and we did bird flu, and is it okay if we just up the ante a little bit and really put the pressure on them so that they'll kowtow to you in the trade talks?" And he said, "Oh yeah, sure." And the next thing all of his businesses are dying.
Could have been that, yeah. They probably told him, "Hey, SARS didn't come back on us, so this isn't either." And then, whoops, yeah, that would explain why he didn't do anything for 4 months while knowing about it. So that's actually a possibility.
Yeah, he was like paralyzed with, oh my God. So anyway, maybe the feds will bail Trump out, maybe they won't. But anyway, here's our good news. The good news is that this is what the check looks like that you haven't gotten and you're supposed to get, but who knows if you ever really will. But this is what it looks like, and it has Donald Trump's name on it. And so we can all rest assured that our future is very bright despite this terrible coronavirus epidemic.
I have a feeling that the people who claim they did get the checks, they probably did send these out or direct deposit them to some people, and then they paid those people to brag about it on Twitter, and so then they could get away with not sending us the rest of the checks and just saying, "Oh yeah, they're just waiting for Trump to stamp his thing on it," and so then the rest of us don't get our checks. I don't know. I mean, I would be very surprised if I see one of these things.
Yeah, I'm not holding my breath till mine arrives either, but at least we know what it looks like. This is what it looks like. Just visualize this check with your name on it and be happy.
It looks like a tax return. It looks like a tax refund check, just with Trump's name on it.
Exactly. Yeah. I wonder if he's going to put his name on those too. Who knows? If he merges his checking account with the U.S. Treasury checking account, that would solve his problem with his hotel business, wouldn't it?
Yep.
So how about the Google scientists who are creating an artificial intelligence that evolves on its own? And, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, is still locked up in Supermax in Colorado, unfortunately, because whoever's behind this, what can you say? What could possibly go wrong, Helen?
Dude, this is really, really bad, especially with Microsoft doing that patent that you mine cryptocurrency with your bodily functions. I mean, between that and this, you have the plot of the Matrix right there. We're batteries. We're going to become batteries for this thing. So this is really bad. Yeah. Where's Uncle Ted when you need him?
Yeah, and even the people in AI tell us that they foresee that, if we're lucky, it'll keep us as pets. But they go ahead and do it anyway.
But Elon Musk is the same thing. He's constantly warning about how, the best thing we can hope for is to merge with it. So let's do that. Wait, how about we just don't? Can we just not? I mean, is it possible to just not, or is it too late for that? I think that this is a really terrible idea, and these people, I don't know, maybe they think that because they're the ones who built it that they'll be spared or treated nicely or something. But I have a feeling that they're going to see all of us as the same, and maybe eat us if we're lucky.
Well, Google says that these new AI algorithms have already reproduced decades worth of human-led AI discoveries in only days. So another quantum leap for AI, another quantum leap into the grave for humankind. And finally, maybe we'll be saved by aliens. That's one theory, is that the interdimensional aliens may intervene to save us from our own AI. That would be nice. Here's the former French intelligence director, Alain Juillet, telling us that UFOs are real, they're an affair of governments, and they may come from parallel worlds. He says that there are lots of parallel worlds all around us that we can't see, and that's probably the source of at least some of these UFOs. So
So they're
it's interesting.
setting us up for another War of the Worlds scenario, fake alien invasion. If this pandemic doesn't accomplish what they want, then they're going to have some aliens come in from parallel dimensions. He's an intelligence chief. I mean, this is like, so they're really laying the groundwork for this one too. At first it was climate change, that didn't work. Then it was a pandemic. It seems to be working, but maybe it won't. And then it's going to be fake alien invasion. But no, there are not like intelligent entities. If they're intelligent, are not going to come visit us because we are a self-destructive species who cannot get our heads out of our posteriors, our leaders at least. Those of us, the normal people, don't have that problem, but whatever, we're ruled by psychopaths. If there's an intelligent species out there in another dimension, it's going to see us and it's going to stay far, far away.
Okay, well that could be, but in any case, we've hit the end of our show, and we haven't yet been attacked by creatures from any other dimensions. So more good news. We had a lot of good news on today's show, and even more good news if we're not zapped into a parallel dimension by next week. We'll be back, and Helen, you'll be back next month. It would be even better news if you're back before that, but we'll just have to wait. So thanks, Helen. It was a great show. And,
likewise.
thank you to our viewers and our supporters who keep us going. Last I checked, we were like pathetic $15 short of our goal. So make it up, make my day, and maybe if your stimulus check comes someday, you'll be able to cover it. All right. So see you all next week. God bless, and Ramadan Mubarak. Bye.